All right, well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Mary Price. I'm the Events and Marketing Manager at the Shingo Institute at Utah State University. I'm so excited to have Peter Hines with us today. Peter's had many roles in his lifetime, including being the co-founder of the Lean Enterprise Research Center and the Enterprise Excellence Network. He's an adjunct professor, or was an adjunct professor at the University of South Australia for many years, and he's currently a visiting professor at the Waterford Institute of Technology. He is the founder of SA Partners. They are a Shingo licensed affiliate. They're authorized to teach the Shingo workshops. Peter was inducted into the Shingo Academy just last year. He's also a Shingo examiner, and he's a 3-time Shingo publication recipient. He's had a tremendous career helping others to be successful in business, and we're so grateful to have him. And with that, Peter, I'll turn the time over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Mary. And well, I guess for many of it's good morning. That's good afternoon from me over here in Wales, in the UK. And I'm going to share with you for the next sort of 20 minutes, something like that, a little bit of some of my thinking, particularly around the culture part that's at the center of the Shingo model. So I guess as an audience here, we're all familiar with the Shingo model. And I think what differentiates the Shingo model from a lot of the sort of standard lean stuff is really this focus on the culture and focus on this sort of people aspect, whereas a lot of the sort of lean or Six Sigma stuff is very much focused on the tools. And if I was to sort of categorize what I thought was the real differentiator, it's probably the respect every individual. And I think actually respect every individual is probably even better than the Toyota phrase of respect for people, in that it's probably quite easy for us to respect people, respect in general people, but can we really respect every single individual, even those perhaps we don't like so much or we don't get on with or something like that? So if we take that respect for individual as a forming place, and actually if you think of cause and effect, perhaps between all the different Shingo principles that we're familiar with, I think the formation starts really with this respect for individual, and hence we can then lead with humility, and then as a result we can get various of the enterprise alignment areas or the continuous improvement areas to work. So in this picture, a little bit of a redrawing, I suppose, of the famous Shingo Institute picture, is we could see on one side in Toyota language continuous improvement, the tools and techniques, and the other side is this sort of people side. And the problem here is that in many organizations, they don't really join particularly well. That one side is coming from maybe an operations or industrial engineering perspective, and the other side coming from much more an HR or OD perspective. And they don't connect because of functional boundaries. They don't connect because of the way people think. And actually in terms of some of the behavior of the individuals as well, and how we work in HR, for instance, compared to, say, operations. So I sort of set out to try and look at this, and particularly this sort of cultural bit in the beginning, in the middle, and see how this all fits together. And one of the things that struck me is that we could really start to think about this in terms of a people value stream. So we're all familiar with the famous product value stream and the sort of flow of information and physical flow of products as it goes through the organization. But actually, what I really think we should be trying to do, if we think back to this framework, is probably the central part of the left-hand side is the tools and techniques that we might apply into the product value stream or the service value stream, and by extension, product development and so forth. But actually, if we're trying to make the right-hand side work, how do we do that? So I was taking the same thinking and thinking about this in terms of a people value stream. So if we take a sort of current state of what I often see in organizations, and really the right-hand side starts with the customer, the line manager or the wider business, and then in theory, the equivalent of production control should be the HR department, and then the supplier is a make or buy. But you'll notice that there's very often a lack of a link between the customer and the HR. In other words, HR not particularly linked to the customer. HR may be pushing solutions into the organization, and actually not just pushing into the organization, but we actually see, certainly in larger organizations, a split between, say, the recruitment people, the employee relations people, compliance, learning and development, for example. So if you're an individual, and the flow here is the individual as you're recruited, as you're brought through the organization, it feels like perhaps no one's really concentrating on your flow or maximizing your potential in the organization. As a result, people leave perhaps before they might, and the value adding ratio here by the individual rather than the process that we'd look in a classic value stream map is probably less than 50%. The 45% figure that I show you here is actually based on some research I did with some Italian accounting colleagues of mine some years ago, which was showing the general value adding of most people. So if you look at this, the end result of this classic sort of what we see at the moment is the individual perhaps doesn't feel really cared for by the line manager as much as they might, by HR, by the leadership in the organization. They don't create as much value, and the turnover is much faster. And you could probably think about this yourself. Along your career, has it always seemed like a seamless flow, like we're trying to achieve in a classic lean organization? And then if we think forward to perhaps a future state or even an ideal state, the ideal state is perhaps that we still have the line manager as the customer, and wider than that would be the whole organization. And then we might need to re-envisage what we do in human resources department. In fact, even the term human resource management might be the wrong term. It might be more about people and culture, for example. And we might think of various competencies such as the behavioral norms or KBIs, for instance, for the organization. How do we coach and develop line managers to do the sort of kata coaching and the development work that we all talk about? And then if we think about the individual, maybe we need to see the organization from the individual's point of view, and then think about the types of flow that we would actually want the individual to go down. So their flow of their learning and development, their ability to coach, their mental and physical well-being as examples of these flows. And then perhaps if getting more out of the individual so that they maybe stay longer, maybe we create increasing value-adding percentages. So instead of 45%, maybe it's 60, 70, 80%, something like that. What we're going to get is a much more value-adding by the individual, much better feel by the individual, much better flow, and in fact, everyone is going to gain. And the result of this is if it's all about the culture, and culture is at the middle of the Shingo model, maybe we need to spend a lot more time thinking about the people value stream and actually what is meaningful and value for the organization. And hence, at certainly the team level, we might be focusing much more on lead measures, which are much more people related, as well as the classic sort of KBI type things that we've all learned from the Shingo Institute. So the idea of flow has two sides to it. So as we see here, these personal flows would be taking the sort of lean concept of, doing it as quickly as possible without waiting, delays, inefficiency, rework, and so forth. But also, if we think about this from a psychological point of view, as well as a lean or operational excellence point of view, there's actually a term called personal flow that's well known in psychology. And in this is basically saying that during the lifetime of an individual, the individual to get the maximum flow, or in the zone, or in the flow we sometimes use. In other words, this higher state of motivation, this higher state of engagement, this really in the zone, really feeling up for it, really feeling excited about something, is about getting the individual just outside of what they're competent to do, but giving them the right sort of support, the development, the servant leadership, perhaps we might use that term, so that they're actually developed and so forth along the journey. Which is, I think, what many of us are trying to do in a lot of the leadership style, and certainly as the Institute talks about, a lot of that changing the leadership style from a sort of parent-child to much more an adult relationship and serving the needs of people. So a problem with this is that we haven't really, I think most of us in the lean and the wider sort of enterprise excellence community understood, I think, enough about some of the psychology behind what we're doing. And in looking at this, what I found is much of the psychology is not actually that positive in terms of some of the key things that the psychology tells us, particularly the theory of self-determination by Ryan and Decci, in this case referencing back to 2000, although the work goes back earlier than that. What they've identified is that most of us are seeking three things in what we're trying to do. We're seeking autonomy. In other words, we want to do things our own way. We want to have a say in deciding what to do, choosing our own measures, choosing our routines, and so forth. The second is we're seeking competence. We want to be good at something. It doesn't necessarily mean good at being the CEO, but we want to be the best person at, I don't know, TPM or root cause problem solving, or running the Scouts Club or a football team or something like that. And relatedness is all of us as human beings, we're actually social animals. We want to relate to people. We want to have, we want to feel part of a community, a belonging, whether that's a family, a team, a workplace, or whatever. So if we think a little bit about how classic lean, the left-hand side of the bridge, stacks up, what we can see is it's a mixed bag. If we think about management and Hoshin and all these types of things, actually, although there is catchball, it's largely a top-down approach, which is not giving as much autonomy as we might to the individual. Standard work and autonomy, on the face of it, have a conflict with each other, not necessarily if the people at the front line actually have a major say in the development of the standard work. Good is the bottom-up ideas and continuous improvement, Kaizen activity. So yeah, mixed. Competence is often we're pushing improvement, we're pushing courses that are coming from the human resources area. Sometimes people don't know why they're on a course, and often we don't give them the opportunity to use some of the knowledge and skills afterwards. So maybe that one's not so good. Relatedness, team-based problem solving, huddles and so forth, yes, very good. But what I've also noticed is that when we're working in the organization, when we're thinking of problem solving and so forth, we're often really focusing on the job itself. But actually, there's many hours at work, lunchtime breaks, that non-job activity. So some of the little clubs or canteen room conversations, for example, actually a lot of relatedness happens in those times, but we don't really focus on that as well as we could be. So it's a bit of a mixed bag if we think of psychology and lean. So perhaps what we're trying to achieve here, and this sort of picture I'm sure is not new to you, but the classic organization, a traditional organization, is top down, CEO, middle managers, supervisors, operators, and so forth, where the autonomy is high for the top of the organization, whereas the bottom of the organization is told what to do, supports them, etc. So a command and control. And then we talk about servant leadership. I've called this people value stream organizations. And here we have team members at the top, team leaders, group leaders, CEO, right at the bottom. And here we often hear a lot about how we change leadership and how we do, you know, bottom up and servant leadership and coaching people. And many organizations do that, and some do it really well. But in reality, I think the mindset for many is still more on the left-hand side rather than the right-hand side. So here's one to ponder. is if the focus is about culture, and if culture is the sum of the behaviors, and most of the people work at this sort of team member or team leader level, then we really need to get some of this thinking and culture working at that level. So we need to think about what's going to motivate these people, what's going to get them to have the right type of behavior, what's actually going to motivate, what's going to engage them, how are we going to make this change? And one thing that strikes me is we do a lot of work on leadership development, moving from a parent to an adult type of relationship, adult to adult conversations. The problem being, if the mentality in the organization is still a little bit more on the left-hand side, where people at this operator level are used to being treated like a child, parent-child relationship, and we haven't done much to change their way of thinking and provide this self-reliance to them, then even if we're doing the servant leadership stuff on the right-hand side, we then have a parent-to-child relationship, an adult-to-child relationship, and hence it's not really going to work that well. So we've been thinking about what we might do. So this really goes, now we need to think a little bit about brain science, and we all have a multi-level brain. The most basic level, something's hot, we drop it. And if you go up the levels, the third level out of 4 is the limbic brain, which is the emotional brain, the feeling brain, and so forth. So this is where if you have a very strong reaction to something, say at work, very positive or very negative, let's say it's very negative. So you're asked to take part in a Kaizen event, but you had a bad experience last time, or you had a bad evening the night before, or you had an argument with your team leader that morning. You're really not going to do anything at all. You're not going to take part. You're not going to get root cause, and actually it's not going to work, and certainly it's not going to sustain. And if you don't get that feeling and that emotional connection, however much good work we do in the cortex, the smart part of the brain, plan, do, check, act, for example, is it never really hits people because they never get that part. They get stuck in this limbic part of the brain. So I think we need to do is we need to turn some of the bottom of the organization up. We need to start thinking about the individual. What do they need? What culture do they need? What are their personal purposes and meaning for them in the organization in order to change the culture in the organization and get this sort of cultural direction? So going into, again, some of the psychology, and this is far too much detail to look at, but the top part of this is coming from some of this psychology. And what the psychology tells us is we need to go beyond the sort of command and control, the carrot and stick in terms of motivation. And we need to do 2 things. One is we need to understand from the individual what is intrinsically motivating for them. So in other words, what are the things that are really, they're going to have a passion about? So something I'm passionate about, or I've got a strength in, or I really want to get out of in my career is going to motivate me. And secondly, how can we allow or provide a way of them making sense of the Hoshin type thing in a way that's meaningful? So I'll give you a very quick example. So I'm a member of a golf club, and in my golf club, they're passionate, the people there, most of them, about beating other teams, other golf clubs in a friendly sort of way, and the handicap of the individuals, absolutely passionate. For me, neither of those have any meaning at all. I don't want to play other teams in golf. I don't want to do that. And I've got no interest in improving my handicap whatsoever. However, what I am passionate about, my son and I, we like to go and do 9 holes on a Sunday, is actually reducing our average, which is on a spreadsheet, on a computer, and we'll sit down and we'll work out how do we improve on the 3rd hole, etc. So that spreadsheet and that data is something I've created, I've measured, is meaningful. Actually, it's the same really as the number on the handicap, but the handicap is a bit like, more profit or quality to the customer, maybe not meaningful. So what's the equivalent to that spreadsheet for our individuals? So if we do that, we need to think about this as some sort of improvement cycle. Maybe we think about, instead of PDCA, which is the cortex, the limbic brain is saying, what is meaningful for me, purpose and belief? And do would be the flows. How on my career do I flow upon these areas? How do I reflect, maybe on a daily basis, for small continuous improvement, maybe weekly, monthly, or quarterly for my larger discontinuous improvement? And how do I update what am I trying to achieve and pull support? And if we do this sort of thing, we might actually go into these sort of details. My strengths, my values, my passion, leads to what I want to achieve and my goal. Add that to the organizational goals, which will give purpose. Think about what am I trying to achieve in terms of my beliefs. Add those to the sort of beliefs and behaviors the organization is trying to achieve, and thinking about belief and behavior. And from that, we create meaning for the individual. And if we take that forward, we can turn this into a personal cockpit. So what I feel we need to do is we need to almost reverse the Hoshin process. So we have, what am I trying to achieve? My long-term goal, my true north, if you like. Where do I want to be in 5 years' time, 3 years, 1 year? How might I measure that will be meaningful? And what do I need to do in these various flows? And as a result, on a daily basis, again, to be psychologically positive, I will reflect on what have I achieved, one opportunity to develop perhaps, so one positive, 3 positives, 1 corrective area, and those opportunities would go into smaller continuous improvement, as well as some of the bigger discontinuous improvement that comes out of the major steps on the flow, and also the pull for support. So the result of this is actually developing the same sort of idea of Hoshin, coming down to measures, coming down to bigger improvements, coming down to reflection, coming down to continuous improvement, and then a personal huddle, and then pulling support from others in the organization, be they peers, team members, or management, CI, HR, for example. So there are a huge number of implications for this type of thinking, of really turning this organization upside down, which is really, I think, a missing part in this cultural change. We've done a lot of the leadership part, but we haven't done much of the employee part, so we can genuinely listen to the voice of the employee or voice of the associate, for example. So that's probably a quick summary of some of the thoughts. So maybe what I'm going to do now is turn it back to, maybe the journey is still on. So as I age, I'm going off into the distance and so forth. So Mary, we've probably got just a few minutes for a few questions, if there are any out there.
Yes, we do. If you have any questions, please add it to the Q&A. The first question we have is from Raquel, and she asks, what is the good distribution of stages of the employees in an organization to pursue the excellence journey? Or how many employees should be in stage 1, 2, and 3 to support the organization in its journey?
In the stages that I talked about, is that, I'm assuming that, I mean, really what we need to do is we need to get everyone into the 3rd stage. That's really where we need to be. I think the classic lean organization is in that 2nd stage, and it's missing really this integration with the cultural side. So I think it's really, we need to get everyone into the 3rd side. However, most attention has been paid to the leaders, but the leaders are only a small population. So what I'm suggesting, we need probably that 90% of people that are more at the associate level, moving them by looking at this sort of bottom-up way of thinking as well.
Thank you. Next question is, how do you actually address each individual in a classic leadership structure where most leaders basically have personal leadership as an add-on? Do you separate personal from workload leadership?
Okay, well, I think the first point is we need to challenge actually what do people do? And probably we should think about at the associate level, in the organization. People are mostly doing the day work. They're also doing some improvement work. At the frontline leader level, I think we should be doing most of the day work, the improvement, and some cultural change. But a lot of what we're doing at the senior leader level is of managing the work itself. I don't think we should be doing. So that should be at the middle level. So mostly what we should be doing at the senior level is what we might call leadership, development of people, and personal leadership. So in other words, I think we should change what we actually do so that leaders at the top are freed up from a lot of that day-to-day stuff, so that they can actually really lead in the organization.
Thank you. Next question. What does mentoring play into this process? Do you believe in reverse mentoring, where young people mentor more experienced employees in a new tech stuff, et cetera?
Okay, well, I think, the whole sort of third stage, where we call it people value stream or servant leadership or whatever we want to call it, I think this whole mentoring and coaching and developing people is the art of what is the role of a leader in the organization. It's the number one thing they need to do. I think the role of reverse mentoring is really key, because new people coming into the workplace are a lot more, say, tech savvy, industry 4.0, these sort of things, and also maybe have a different mentality. And some of the older generation, the perhaps middle-aged white man sort of syndrome, need to get some education in some of the things that actually the newer workforce is actually doing. So actually that reverse mentoring, I think, can be quite helpful in many cases to sort of break some of those static things.
There has been several questions about the recording and the slides, and those will be emailed to all the registrants after the session is ended today. The next question we have is, how do we get leadership and HR to see this and help us? Has anyone done this? How long does it take? And is there a model pathway?
The answer is there are a number of organizations who look close to the sort of things that I'm doing. Generally speaking, they're not the classic lean organizations who sort of get stuck. A number of the Shingo Winning Institute companies actually do look quite like this, but probably some of the newer generation tech firms actually look much more like the sort of things that I'm talking about. The sort of Netflixes and Amazons and people like that have more similarity to some of these things that I'm doing. Currently, we're working with a number of organizations to do exactly this sort of personal cockpits, tier zero management, that we call it, to actually create this type of approach that we're looking at here.
Thank you. Next question. How do you avoid parent-child relationships in a highly regulated prescriptive environment with a highly variable workforce, long lead time for training and moderate turnover?
Okay, well, clearly it's a where do we start? It's sort of question. And yes, it's not an easy thing to do. I think the starting point is probably working with the senior leadership community to get some understanding of what this is about, to start to challenge some of the thinking in the organizations, maybe go and see or benchmark some organizations that are doing this sort of thing. And then from that point, getting into some more detailed learning and thinking and education of what do we need to do, how do we need to do it, what are the next steps, and so forth on this particular journey.
Thank you. Last question is, are you aware of any healthcare organizations that model this approach?
At this point, no, not in detail. I think most of the organizations that are closer to this probably come from more the general service environment, although we have a few organizations in manufacturing trying to do this. I think you could be the first. There we are. There's my challenge for you.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, Peter, for presenting today. And thank you for everyone that's attended. If you would like to learn more, Peter is actually doing a workshop for us in conjunction with the European conference. The workshop's on November 17th, and it's from 1 to 5 p.m. in the Greenwich Mean Time. And to register and learn more about that workshop, you can go to shingo.org/events. Thank you so much.
I should also mention that's with my colleague Cheryl Jekyll, who's coming from a US perspective and very much a sort of lean human resources perspective. So it's to be recommended if you can find the time for that. Thank you.